In the fall of 2004, an undercover police officer in Texas stood in line at a fast food restaurant, like any customer waiting in the queue. But in reality, he was secretly trying to get a glimpse of two individuals dining in the restaurant whom he had been observing all day. As he approached them, he saw something that shocked him. His hand instinctively reached for his gun, and he tapped his partner on the shoulder, gesturing towards the individuals before they headed straight towards them. For those watching the channel for the first time, we are a storytelling channel that delves into all the strange and mysterious events happening on planet Earth. The story we are about to tell you today is one where any attempt to predict its events is likely to fail. Support this episode by hitting the like button and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. On the evening of June 17, 2004, a 21-year-old woman named Molly Daniels arrived at the garage of her house, where she lived with her husband and their 2 children. It had been a long and exhausting day at the interior design company where she worked as a receptionist. When she opened the door, all the exhaustion she had felt turned to joy because the first thing she heard was her son Caleb's laughter, who was 4 years old. She entered his room and saw him playing with her husband, while their 1-year-old son sat on the floor watching them, happy. She greeted everyone with a smile and felt content seeing them. She felt content knowing she had a loving family. Then she went to prepare dinner. The family's financial situation was difficult. The city they lived in was developing, and rents were increasingly exorbitant. Clay, her husband, was a mechanic who had been out of work for a long time, so he stayed at home with the children. Molly was the one working, but her salary was not enough to cover their needs until the end of the month. Despite this, as she mentioned, she was very happy with her husband and family, especially with her 4-year-old son, who was her ex-husband's son. After introducing the family, let's move on to the details. After the children finished eating and went to sleep, Molly and Clay were watching TV. Then Molly said she was tired and wanted to sleep. Clay said he would stay awake for a while. After she went to her room to sleep around 10:45, she began to doze off. Suddenly, she heard the sound of the car in their garage starting, and shortly after, the car drove off. She wasn't surprised, because Clay had told her he was going to his mother's house. At 6 a.m., she woke up, and the strange thing was that Clay wasn't beside her. She ran to the window to check the car, but it wasn't there. She felt worried, went downstairs, but he wasn't there either. She called his mother, and when she answered, she asked her, "Is Clay with you?" She said no. The distance between Clay's house and his mother's house was a 65-kilometer-long highway full of curves, located between the mountains and known for its danger. He was used to this road as he frequently visited his mother's house. Suddenly, both Molly and the mother fell silent, wondering if he had had an accident on the way to his mother's house last night. Clay's mother asked Molly to stay at home with the children. Then they hung up. The mother rushed to her car and immediately headed towards the road. While traveling and searching for Clay's car, she noticed a crisis and police cars, ambulances, and fire engines blocking the road. The first thought that crossed her mind was that it might be her son. She parked her car on the side of the road, got out, and started running towards them. She asked the first officer she reached, "What's happening here?" But she noticed smoke rising from the forest on the side of the road behind the police. She was trying to see what was going on, but the officer tried to push her away. She pushed him aside and saw a car off the road, engulfed in flames among the trees. She asked the police, "Whose car is this? Is it my son's car?" The officer told her to calm down. So far, they had no information. They were trying to extinguish the fire. Unable to wait, she returned to her car and took another route to her son's house. Clay's mother brought Molly and returned to the scene of the accident. As soon as they arrived, they went to the police. The fire was under control, and they extinguished it. As soon as Molly saw the car from the outside, she knew it was theirs. The police, after approaching the car and opening the door, realized there was someone inside. There were human remains in the driver's seat, along with their belongings and a piece of iron that belonged to Clay. They confirmed it was him. When the news of his death spread, the whole neighborhood sympathized with Molly. All the neighbors loved her. She was a kind and shy woman who never bothered anyone. They tried to help her and raised $1,000 for her. Many neighbors bought household items and filled her fridge with food for her children. Molly was completely devastated, and her sadness was evident to everyone. Although everything seemed clear to the people, the police began to investigate and try to figure out how this accident happened to Clay. Several things puzzled them about the accident. Firstly, there were no traces of the car's wheels at the scene of the accident, suggesting that Clay did not brake before losing control of the car and hitting the tree. Secondly, how did the fire ignite in the car? The fire was so intense that it melted everything, including Clay's body. The forensic laboratories sent a report to the police confirming their suspicions. The report indicated the presence of a flammable liquid on the front seats of the car, explaining the intense and powerful fire. Most importantly, the forensic report stated that Clay's lungs were clean from the inside, suggesting that he was likely killed before the fire. Strangely, when this information spread in the neighborhood that Clay was murdered and the incident was not an accident, no one was surprised by Clay's killing. Ignoring the fact that Molly was beloved in the neighborhood and loved Clay, as he was a kind father to the children, the people in the neighborhood didn't like Clay because he had a troubled history and always caused problems with others. During his funeral, one of his closest friends stood in front of everyone and said, "The world is better without Clay." This prompted the investigators to delve into his past and see if he had any grudges or issues with anyone. It turned out that 10 days before his death, he was involved in an incident where he was accused of assaulting a 7-year-old girl. However, the sentence he received was lenient, only 30 days, and the sentence was not enforced, with Clay under supervision. The girl's father, who was very angry about the light sentence, had threatened to kill Clay 2 days before his death. The police brought him in for questioning, and he made it clear that he despised Clay and was very angry about the lenient sentence. He admitted to threatening him but denied any involvement in his death. The police decided to talk to Molly again to try to understand more. During their first conversations with Molly, she was polite, quiet, and very sad about her husband. However, when they visited her home this time, everything seemed to have changed. She was no longer the same sad woman they had seen a few days ago. When they asked her if she suspected anyone, she abruptly suggested that Clay might have been depressed about the sentence and that he might have killed himself. She asked them to leave her house and not to ask her about him again. The police didn't comment on her statement and left her alone. However, as soon as they sat in the car, they all agreed that something was off with the girl and she was hiding something. They said, "Let's investigate this girl a bit." Indeed, they found something that made them suspect her even more. It was that she had a $110,000 life insurance policy on Clay, and she was the beneficiary. She used to call the insurance company every day, pestering them with questions about when she would receive the money and when it would be transferred to her account. The second thing is that they found out that Molly was in a relationship with a new guy. She would go out with him, and he would come to her house. It hadn't been 3 weeks since Clay's death, their 4-year-old son. He couldn't accept the presence of this new person in their lives, and the boy's behavior changed, becoming aggressive, always demanding his father. Despite all the suspicions around them, there was no strong evidence linking her to Clay's death. Things remained this way until the fall of 2004. The police couldn't gather much information about his death and how the car ended up burning on the side of the road. After all this time, they decided to focus on Molly again. They said, "Let's put her under 24-hour surveillance and monitor all her movements." Initially, all the reports that came about Molly were normal. She would get up in the morning, take her son to school, go to work, and her errands were normal until December 3, 2004. 6 months after Clay's death, she was returning from work, changed her route, and stopped at a group of shops. Instead of entering one of the shops, she went towards a Ford Mustang driven by a guy with black hair. She started talking to him and then looked around to see if anyone was watching her before getting in with him. The police followed them until they reached a fast food restaurant called Taco Bell. The undercover police officer, dressed in civilian clothes, who was monitoring them, requested support from another undercover officer who was also monitoring them. They actually entered the restaurant and stood in line to order food. As I mentioned at the beginning of the story, when he approached them, he saw something that shocked him. He involuntarily reached for his gun and touched the shoulder of his partner next to him, gesturing towards the individuals, and then they headed straight towards them. When they reached the table, the surprise was that the person with Molly was Clay. The only thing that had changed was that he dyed his hair black. They later found out that it was Molly and Clay. They staged the death scene so that he wouldn't serve the punishment that had been imposed on him for the incident with the little girl and so that they could get $110,000, the life insurance money. The body in the car turned out to be that of an 81-year-old woman. They dug up her grave, placed her in the car, and set it on fire, which is why there were no tire marks from the car on the side of the road. Their plan was successful initially, and everyone believed that he was dead and was preoccupied with how he died. But no one thought that he would be alive at the beginning of the case. He was living in another city but couldn't bear to be away from them, so he dyed his hair black and returned to live with them as normal. Their 4-year-old son understood that this was his father, but he just changed his hair color. They kept convincing him that this was not his father. This is why the boy became confused, changed his behavior, and became aggressive, always shouting. The strange thing about the whole situation was that as long as they were living together, why would they go to meet in a distant place secretly and leave the car in another place and ride in another car? In any case, it was this foolish meeting that revealed them. Both of them were charged with defrauding the insurance company. Molly was sentenced to 20 years in prison, and Clay was sentenced to 30 years in prison and an additional 20 years for violating the terms of his probation. Personally, the whole story shocked me. The sentences were perplexing: attacking a 7-year-old girl, 30 days, and insurance fraud, 30 years. This was our story for today. I hope you enjoyed it, and don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel.